Good morning. Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Princeton. We are in our open and welcoming community we live from a center of hope, love, justice, and joy. We extend a special welcome to our visitors here. We're so glad that you joined us this morning, and we invite you to stop by our newsletter table after the service so that we can get you any information you'd like about our congregation. Again, welcome one and home to you, Princeton, this morning. Happenings in your order of service has a ton of announcements about our upcoming activities and events, including that you are invited to join members of our Rainbow Ministry Group for a second workshop this afternoon. This one will be interfaith that unpacks the myths and misinformation behind transphobia. Today at noon, Rainbow will be welcoming multiple Princeton area denominations to our congregation right here for a discussion, as well as a Q&A session, exploring how our different faith traditions call us away from today's climate of hatred and intolerance and toward an ethic of love and care in defense of trans youth and other vulnerable members of the beloved community. That's today right after worship right here, so stick around for that. And also on the back page of your order, you'll see that next Sunday is finally our taco party and trunk or treat extravaganza. Trunk or treat is in the parking lot. Bring some treats for the kiddos and enjoy a taco buffet with your friends old and new. All this is right after worship, which is also a taco themed worship service next week. We're just going all in this year with tacos all day. Please check out the sign up genius on our church website to volunteer to make this happen. And so that our volunteers know how much food to purchase. So please do sign up for this event. And of course, wear a costume if you'd like. And now drawing from the strengths of yesterday and envisioning the world of tomorrow. Let us aspire to live this day justly, loving mercy and walking humbly with the holy. Come, let us worship together.
First, it's an intention, then it's an action, then a practice, then a consistency, then a habit, then it's simply who you are. Anonymous online source.
Our prayer this morning comes from the pen of the great Christian mystic and spiritual leader of the civil rights movement, Howard Thurman. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of the holy, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in good times or in tempests, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. And here in the silence of this sacred space, we offer these, the prayers and meditations of our hearts. May it be so, and amen.
Good morning. Good morning. So it's been about 4 years since I was actually here as an official worship associate,
But Reverend Bill invited me to come back as an emeritus, is that pronounced right? Emeritus worship associate, and I'm very happy to have had that ask. I like being up here and I enjoy taking the time to put my thoughts together. I remember years and years ago, I don't remember what the topic was, but Reverend Bill had mentioned that ministers often preach the sermon that they need to hear. And I think that in the case of what I'm here to talk today about intention, I fit that mold. I've always been really impressed with people who have focus and intention, people who can say exactly what it is that they care about and recognize that everything else is just a distraction that can be stripped away without really losing focus on what matters to them. So I'm envisioning a person who knows exactly what their career path is and they're doing it. And it's what their soul screams out for. I'm thinking about people who can stick with a hobby that they get absolutely lost in and never lose the curiosity that brought them to that hobby in the beginning. I also really love being in the presence of people who have an eye for design or style, that they can set up their physical space in a way that changes the mood of the people who enter it without them ever really realizing it. Because what really is a sense of style other than just having a vision for what you would want something to look like, have a space to look like, and then making it happen? Unfortunately, I'm not any of these people. I've never been a goal-oriented person. I don't look 5 years into the future and imagine myself as who I'll be. I don't set career aspirations that I won't deviate from. I don't have a future self that I'm very focused on becoming. My interests change with the wind. And as much as I wish it was otherwise, I tend to live in a reactive mode rather than a proactive mode. There's a million choices and a million concerns every day. I should eat better. I should pay more attention to what's going on in my kids' school. I should be more active in a social movement I care about. I should finish that project for work. I should stop and just enjoy the moment because it's beautiful outside. I should do something special for somebody else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Yeah. And I admit that out of habit, I usually just spend my time playing whack-a-mole. Whatever pops into my head at the moment is what gets my focus. And I end up washing dishes, and I end up cleaning up, and I end up frittering away my time without much planning or much intention. Maybe that's parenthood. So with years of introspection, I finally just accepted that this is who I am, and I've learned to, at least most of the time, be comfortable with myself. I grew up as the younger brother of a serious overachiever, somebody who has lists and works on them diligently. And I learned even from infancy, he was my role model. But no matter how hard I tried at anything, no matter how much energy I put trying to be the best, I would never be the best. So instead of trying to be the best, I always worked on just making myself more interesting. And I tried to just find joy in the act of getting just good enough at something that I could be competent, but doing that with a million different things. All this said, what am I doing up here talking about intention? This is the sermon that I need to hear. So it's a term that I've used a lot in the past. I want to be more intentional, but it's always something that has been just out of reach. And yet here I am. So a really funny thing happened last year about this time. I think it was October. I was going through an old computer hard drive looking for some old documents that I needed. And somewhere buried deep in an old hard drive was this little file called goals. And I looked at the date, and it was eerie that it was within a week of being 10 years to the date that I had written this document called goals. I said, I'm going to have to go dig this up. And now I've got to see what was it that I was so moved by 10 years ago to put down as my goals. And I remember doing it, but realistically, I had not opened it up again in those 10 years. So it's a little bit of context. 10 years ago, I remembered that when I wrote those, I was not in a great place personally. I had a marriage that was crumbling. It ended. I recently resigned from a career path to find something better and was already contemplating another total teardown on the professional front. But more than any of that, I didn't feel like I was having positive impact on the world around me. I felt like I was just doing what I could to have as little responsibility as possible, but still enough money to entertain myself when I wanted to. I was unsatisfied with the life I'd built around me, and that's what prompted me to write down these goals. I wanted to snap my finger and be a better person than I was. Fast forward 10 years later, here I am opening up this document. I read through the list of what I thought I needed to improve at that time, and it was a long list. It was an ambitious decade ago self that I was, there were 7 elements of life that I wanted to focus on. Family relationships, community connection, physical health, spiritual pursuit, economic standing, creative outlets, and social growth. That was absurd to try to put 7 things that big and that broad all at once. And as is my habit, I lost focus. But something happened now 10 years into the future as I was rereading this list. I started to think about where I was in those categories that felt so important then. And I realized that I was more on target than I would have ever imagined. My current life is not by any stretch perfect, and it was certainly not who I would have imagined myself being when I wrote these goals down. But I've made significant progress in all 7 of the categories. I went from feeling emotionally distant from my family to having a family of my own, something I never imagined. I went from having no spiritual pursuits to having a role at UUCP as a very central part of who I am. I went from feeling no community impact to having built several meaningful communities all my own. The list went on and on and on. Every one of these goals I had written down was something that I had very dramatically turned around in the 10 years since. And with 2 exceptions, I never really felt that I worked on these goals with drive or focus or measurement of my progress. I didn't type A it. And yet somehow I made improvements towards all of them. There was something magical about writing them down, putting it in to an intention that moved forward without tracking the progress of the person I intended to be. I know that there will always be more growth ahead, but a decade ago, I would have never imagined that success towards these goals would turn out to look the way it does now. In many ways, I became the person my intentions created imperfectly and very unexpectedly. But it wasn't just a hope or a dream. It was an intention, and it worked. So now what? I'm 10 years older. I have some growth behind me and a lot more growth ahead of me, I hope. But will I learn a lesson from this? Will I recognize how powerful it was to actually set this intention mindfully? But I guess really only time will tell. So you watch. If 10 years from now, you see me still having a great relationship with my then teenage boys, you'll know that it works.
Once in middle school, I was standing in a weedy field, sort of playing softball during gym class. I say sort of because we had far too many people for 2 teams, which meant that there were about 10 of us standing in an outfield that very few batters could reach from the plate. The grass hadn't been recently mowed either, so grounders that got past the infield didn't go very far into the outfield. They usually hit the grass and stopped rolling immediately, and we'd trot over and pick them up and kind of toss them a few feet to the infield. This was not high-level athletics. It was kind of a depressing game of softball, played by bored and fidgety teens adorned in itchy and ill-fitting gym uniforms. Seemed silly then, still seems silly now, but also kind of sweet, like something we should all just learn to go through and look back upon one day smiling. Those of us in the outfield chatted with each other. We looked for 4-leaf clovers. We talked about class and clubs and games and goofing off as batter after batter stepped up to the plate and hit softballs that needed absolutely none of our attention. Periodically, our teacher would shout at us to keep our eye on the ball to watch what was happening, which we would for a pitch or 2, but that attentiveness was always short-lived. It was pretty boring out there. Until one moment when I was lost in the thought in the weeds of the outfield, eyes up looking at the clouds, when I heard my gym teacher, a wonderful teacher named Mr. Mall, one of my favorite teachers ever, shout my name with surprising urgency. Mr. Mull always called me by my last name, and I heard him yell, "Neely, watch out!" And I looked forward in time to see a very well hit ball slam directly into my gut. The batter, who was small of stature but strong in power, had launched a moonshot my way. I'd never seen a softball hit that far. It hit my stomach like a meteorite, and I immediately doubled over, grunting. To my credit, I did quickly pick up the ball and heave it to the infield, which prevented that young Willie Mays from getting a home run. But I spent the rest of that game and day with a particular soreness that rose from not remembering what I was supposed to be doing in that outfield. Mr. Mull seemed to know that a certain lesson had been learned as well. As I winced in at the end of the inning, he asked me if I was okay. I said, yeah. And then he laughed and said, "Bet you'll pay attention next time, won't you, Neely?" And indeed, I would. It's not uncommon to be lost in the weeds. It happens to everyone. But it can be helpful during those times to remember what it is that we're supposed to be doing. We can remember why we're in the field of play to begin with. We can remember our call, our purpose, our intention, what Howard Thurman called in our prayer, our highest resolve. In that case, I was there because that was class. I had no choice. But in our larger lives, we have far more agency over why we are where we are and with whom we are wandering in the fields of play, work, family, and faith. This sense of intention, which is held along with purpose, as living intentionally in pursuit of a purpose, holds qualities of awareness and focus and practice. We become aware of a purpose or something we feel called to do or offer and develop an intention around living into that offering. Sometimes this intention comes from being inspired how someone else is living their life. Sometimes it comes from being dissatisfied with how something is going on in our lives. Sometimes it's this whisper of conscience or a creative urge or a work of art or some opening brought about by age or expanding horizons. Or sometimes it's all of this, but a sense develops that we are intended to live in a different way, one that changes, openness, and ultimately leads us to discipline. This is the New Year's resolution part, or the first few days of that 30 days to a new you program that we all try now and again. After that awareness comes focus, which is easy at first, but grows difficult. And this is why most resolutions are discarded long before Valentine's Day, or why those new you emails are sent to spam after 10 days or so. We lose focus just because life happens and demands that we instead focus on our immediate responsibilities. As we set and move toward new intentions, we have to maintain and strengthen the lives we're currently leading. And sometimes weaving those together can be really, really difficult, particularly when we're caring for others, when we're responsible for others, deeply interwoven with the daily needs of others. Developing a new you can understandably seem like an indulgence because the you, not the new you, is who people count on. Go to any retreat center, spa, vacation, health resort that runs self-improvement programs, and it's easy to see who has the time and funds and space to cultivate in those places a sense of newness. Many find those resources too scarce to fund such growth and relaxation, for we all aren't equally abundant in the freedom of time. But if we're being honest, even people with a lot of free time lose focus too, just because after the energy of the new intention wanes, it's easy to find other ways to spend that free time. Something can always get in the way if we let it. I'm reminded of the old Hasidic story in which a student asks his rabbi for help in his prayer life. The rabbi asks him what's wrong, and the student says that he gets distracted by thoughts that he can't control when he's praying. The rabbi says, "What would you do if someone knocked on your door and you didn't want to talk to them? Would you let them in?" And the student says, "No, I'd turn them away." And the rabbi said, "It's the same way with those thoughts. You can't keep them from knocking, but you can turn them away." That's the rabbi encouraging a kind of focus that will allow the student to develop the kind of prayer life that he wants. To be clear, we all have some people who knock on our doors and we cannot, should not, and would not turn away. The rabbi himself would teach that. The rabbi himself would teach that if someone is knocking on your door with the true need that you can meet for food, for shelter, for clothing, for medicine, your prayer becomes meeting the needs of that person out of gratitude for being able to do it. You become lucky to be the one who can help. You are blessed to be able to help, and your prayer becomes service, something we say all the time in our modern faith, something that, however, has its roots in ancient Judaism, for whom sometimes prayer was prayer, and sometimes prayer was service. And the only thing to be worried about when prayer was all one and none of the other. Prayer as prayer keeps us serving God. Prayer as service keeps us serving the world. And that is the intersection of a good and faithful life. But if we think of those visitors as intrusions on our free time, however limited, that we could spend in moving toward a more intentional life, then we all have some turning away we can do, just as the rabbi instructed the student. What should I turn away from? Junk TV, mindless scrolling, and sugar. Maybe we share some of those. And with intention and focus, we have practice, which is the regular turning toward that intention and doing something to move in its direction, however slightly. Maybe it's studying something, doing something, trying something. These are the practices that we begin with gusto and feel good about at first, but soon it seems like nothing is happening and we turn that practice away or just gradually stop doing it, even though it was never meant to be easy. Change is not often even meant to be obvious. And the work of transformation is the reward itself, a reward not measured in accolades, but in hours and efforts spent in its pursuit. This is why in my own life, I think more in terms of spiritual discipline than spiritual practice. Practice to me sounds kind of unnecessary. As Allen Iverson, the great basketball player, dismissively said, practice? We're talking about practice? If you watch Ted Lasso, he was copying Allen Iverson in that scene, practice. Practice seems to me kind of optional. And knowing that, I will surely opt out. It's sort of something to try for a while, to practice for a while, and then practice something else. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but bouncing around from this to that will never lead to a life of depth. I'm reminded of the Taoist parable in which a guy complains to his neighbor about not being able to get any water from his well. The neighbor asked, well, how far down did you dig your well? And the guy said 10 feet, which should have been more than enough. But when they went to explore the well, the neighbor saw that the guy had dug 10 feet, but he had dug 10 wells 1 foot deep each. The neighbor said, you've got to dig one well deeper, which was what he had to do. And then in my retelling of this parable, that neighbor then grabs a shovel and helps the other one start digging. That's my retelling because I know that's exactly what you all would do if you were that neighbor. You would grab the shovel and you would help dig. Discipline just has more weight. It's aware that moving toward a more intentional life is not about blissed out moments on a mountain as much as it is about showing up every day and moving toward that intention. Discipline is about the work, which is the action, which is how we move toward our intention. It has more utility in this sense. It assumes more strength. It also assumes discomfort and weaves that into the journey itself. I was once running alongside a guy a couple of decades my junior, which happens with increasing but still unsettling regularity these days, in a race on a very cold and very wet day. I said something about those conditions, and then something else about them, and then something else. And he said kindly, but also clearly, yeah, it looks like we're just going to have to be okay with being wet and cold for a while. Point taken, and that's discipline. And whether we call it discipline or practice or action, it's what must follow from the intention and that focus. Setting the purpose, remembering and developing it, and then those actions that we take with whatever time and resources we have are what can get us through the weeds and back home. And home will seem different because we're different. We're always different. As the great T.S. Eliot wrote in Little Gidding, in words that are also in the back of our gray hymnal, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And during that exploration, we may take a softball or two in the gut, but a life spent in active pursuit of a big purpose, one like service or leadership or being the kind of friend or family member you want to be, or offering those gifts that only you can offer in the most fruitful way possible is going to take some time in the weeds and some gut punches and some cold and wet steps. But those can all be taken together too, under the watch and with the love of people who care for you and who are on your team. People like your congregation, people like your close friends, people like those who will, once they know you're okay, smile with you and cheer on your next efforts. And there will be people who won't, who will disbelieve you with words that will dishearten rather than encourage you. That rabbi would tell you not to let those voices interrupt what you're doing, and that rabbi would be right. I'm not saying to cut people off, but I am saying that naysayers won't be a part of anyone living a more intentional life, but they may see our model, and one day they might try to live in the same spirit. Until then, we should read and watch, listen to, and pray about that which leads toward intention and purpose and living the life we really want to live. Seek that clarity and surround yourself with people who are on your team, cheering you on, even if they don't really understand what you're doing. And then do something as often as you can to move in that direction. Expect nothing but the journey itself, and know that its fruits are in your growing spirit, your expanding sense of place and purpose, and the abundant blessings that come from a life well lived faithfully, a life meant only to share with your loved ones, your community, and all of those other outfielders under one sky, on one earth, all looking for the luck of a four-leaf clover. May it be so, and amen. And at the end of our hour, we extinguish our chalice, knowing that its light carries us until we gather again. You, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of love and kindness, and go forth knowing that you are held always and always with everyone else by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.